charge to the next cell that has to be caught. Both the nervous and endocrine system each communicate chemically, but the nervous system communicates locally, and the endocrine system is creating over long distance. So the nervous system is a set or series of short connections. This is a diagram. Let's see if I can center this a little better. This is a diagram of our nervous system. The central nervous system originates in our brain functions, and you've heard of the corpus callosum in the brain. We talk about when that malfunctions, some children will become epileptic, having seizures, but the pieces that go together to regulate our nervous system really originate here in the brain stem. And then we have fibers that run throughout our brains that kind of control local centers of neurological activity. The peripheral nervous system comes from our brain down our cranial nerves to our spinal cord. It's going to control that all that lumbar system down in through the sciatica to about mid-knee. You get some sympathetic nerves that run parallel to that, but this is the peripheral nervous system. Then we have all these neural networks that help our eyes to function, and as you work with students with disabilities, eye functioning becomes important in tracking text, in focusing on text, in receiving the visual input of text. The eye becomes real critical. You have a series of glands that function in our oral cavity for speech. Your heart is connected to your nervous system, our lungs, our stomach, all our internal organs, and then they of course are going to drive our systems of muscles to move and to act. And if they don't, you have multiple sclerosis, you have cerebral palsy, you have muscular dystrophy. The list kind of goes on when the system doesn't work. The nervous system can be categorized by those separate divisions. You have that central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, your peripheral nervous system, which is conveying the sensory information of pain, pressure, stimulus response to the central nervous system, and messages from the central nervous system then outward to the muscles and glands. In addition to the brain and spinal cord, the organs, again, that we talked about, your eyes, your ears, taste, smell, skin receptors, your joints, your muscles, other parts of your body. And this is where the neurology becomes complex. There are about 100 billion neurons. Some scientists estimate that we could have 1 trillion nerve cells in the human brain alone. These neurons have many of the same features as other cells. They have a nucleus, they have a cytoplasm, they have a cell membrane. But what makes neurons unique is their shape and function. Neurons, of course, have structures. The first are called dendrites. Dendrites are these little endings that go out. Then we have this cell body, the center of the cell, and the axon, which the axon is what is creating this signal. You have a myelin sheath which protects this axon. One thing we know is that development of this myelin sheath is responsible for us being able to control our muscles. So in some of those conditions I had said earlier, the myelin sheath is damaged or destroyed or thin. The reason a baby can't hold up their head and doesn't have the ability to do much in terms of muscle control is because this myelin sheath is undeveloped. It develops over time, and it provides an insulation. And it also helps increase. The better the sheath, the faster the information travels among your through the dendrites. So, and the sheath is of varying sizes in all individuals. The cells of the nervous system operate by communicating between cells this information. There are two general classes of cells. We have neurons or nerve cells, and then we have glial cells. And this is kind of nerve glue. They're the support cells. Neurons and glial cells are like other cells in the bodies, but they each have these specialized functions. And I'd like you to take a look here in this bottom right-hand corner, and you can take a look at how that nerve ending kind of looks like a series of little electrical wires with a coating. So you can picture that myelin sheath like the coating on an electric cord. So you can also picture that if it's damaged or cracked, or if it's not functioning properly, why the electrical currents might not pass freely. In the cells of the nervous system, they are unique. And I know this one's a little challenging to see. Let me see if I turn it white, if that would help. It's a little challenging because let's see if that helped. There we go. Neurons are unique after a certain point because they don't reproduce or regenerate or grow. So unlike our skin cells or many of our other tissues, they don't grow back when they're lost. In mammal, just after birth, much of the process of neural cell reproduction stops. We know that there is some continuous continuity till about age 5. And we also know with brain plasticity that some people have been able to regenerate or grow new neurons in adulthood, but it's rare. The number of neurons at birth in some brain region may be higher than later in life because the neurons die and they don't reproduce, so they are not replicated. So in contrast to other cells, at a point after birth, most neurons, they never divide again and no new neurons are formed. Now, glial cells, these insulate and support the neurons. They create that myelin sheath. They remove waste products. They nourish the tissue. They prevent harmful substances from entering the brain. One of the things that we're not sure of, but some evidence is beginning to uncover that autism is somehow there is some damage to these glial cells in the brain area, in certain areas around the communication center and around the area of the amygdala. And one of the new developments is we've always said we don't have a gland system that filters toxins or disease out of the brain, that the brain is free of these glands that swell up and kind of help protect us and keep us from infection. And one thing that we're learning is that for some reason children in autism, these glands are acting like there's some type of invading element in the brain, and these glands are overactivated. Myelin sheath is that fatty material that wraps around like layers of an onion and insulates the axon. The myelin functions to speed the conduction of the electrical current so that your cells are communicating. And speed matters in effective processing. We've all got those students that their processing speed is glacial. It's so slow and you have to wait for them to formulate their thoughts. And that is a product of the sheath itself and the speed at which those signals are being sent. Now, babies are born with unmyelinized axons. In part, that explains their slow, uncoordinated actions. But it takes part over years and continues from childhood into adulthood. One of the things they noticed is in people with ADHD, by age 27, the myelinization is typically caught up. However, some of those ADHD symptoms still present after the the sheath is fully developed. From birth to about 3 years of age, this occurs in the brain region where speech is processed and understood. So we don't know exactly why, but in children with autism, this process takes longer. So children that the myelinization occurs earlier are early talkers. Most of the kids in my family were early talkers, and that's something that just comes with the sheath development. But we have 2 grandsons who have autism, and neither of them spoke until they were almost 4 years old. Later cycle occurs in the region of the brain where the cognitive functioning is central, and it's associated with quicker, more complex reasoning. We all know those people who, boy, they can just problem solve on their feet. Things come instantly. That's when the sheath is well developed and those neurotransmitters are functioning well. The neural impulse is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating processes in humans altogether. Because all of a sudden this cell, just these little tiny microscopic cells get excited and the charge builds, and they fire. And this occurs when the cell is depolarized and it kind of reaches this threshold of excitement, and then the ions just flow across the cell membrane. But they don't touch another dendrite, so they have to, it's almost like throwing a ball to the next cell, and this electrical charge travels without sheath or coating and has to be caught and absorbed at just the right speed by the next neuron. This space between neurons is called the synapse, and this synaptic space is this tiny gap between the neurons. So we have these little terminal buttons, or if you can picture little sticky catchers, sticky mitts, and it's going to catch that charge, and it's this enlarged area at the end of the axon. And the synapse that's composed of this terminal button of one neuron throws the charge across space through the synapse, and the dendrites, or the cell body of the other neuron, catches it up and speeds it along its way. If you can picture that 100 billion cells are involved in our brain functions, that this happens typically is probably more miraculous than the fact that sometimes it doesn't work flawlessly. So this transmission between neurons has all these little neural buttons, if you look at these little circular spaces. And this is where, when you have somebody who has a mood disorder, the rate at which these are absorbed or not, and how fast the uptake is and how much is taken in, these neurotransmitters are what's affected by pharmaceuticals to enhance or depress mood. But anyway, these synaptic vesicles are sacs in the terminal buttons, and they release chemicals into this space. There's not a tube, there's not a vessel, it just goes into space, and then it has to be taken up perfectly by the other vessel. So it's a chemical release by these synaptic vesicles. And the receptor sites is the location on the other neuron that allows it to be taken up and passed on. So the neural impulse, it's an all or none law. The neuron either fires or it doesn't. And when it does fire, it produces an impulse of the same strength. So that neuron produces an impulse of the same strength each time, every time. And the intensity of the stimulus is coded by the frequency of the action potentials. One thing we know is that we do have pharmaceuticals that can speed up or slow down this process, but the charge remains the same. Some well-known neurotransmitters are acetylcholine. We hear about that all the time. You can even now buy this over-the-counter. Some people say it will help make your brain functioning better, but regardless, it's a released neuromuscular transmitter, and it plays an important role in the arousal and attention.